The snow crashed against the garage windows like fists pounding on glass. Inside a broken-down car, a 22-year-old girl sat shivering, her fingers blue, her lips cracked, her eyes hollow. She had nothing left. No job. No money. No one to call. The only light cutting through the blizzard came from a small garage where a man in grease-stained overalls was locking up for the night. He had a 5-year-old daughter waiting at home. He had every reason to walk away, but he didn't. 4 days later, when the storm finally broke, that same girl stood at his door with her bags packed. She looked at this stranger who had given her something she couldn't name. Then she said words that made him laugh. "I'll marry you when I'm rich. Wait for me." He never expected to see her again. 6 years later, a luxury car pulled up to that same garage. The woman who stepped out was no longer shivering, and she hadn't come alone. Derek Caldwell wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. The photograph on his workbench caught the last rays of winter light. Caroline's smile frozen in time, her arms wrapped around a 3-year-old Wesley, who didn't yet know that her mother would never hold her again. 2 years had passed since the accident. 2 years of learning how to braid hair with clumsy fingers. 2 years of burning pancakes and reading bedtime stories in voices that never quite matched the ones his wife used to do. The garage was quiet now, the last customer gone. And somewhere across town, his daughter was waiting for him at Mrs. Carter's house, probably already asking when Daddy would come home. The drive through Millbrook took 7 minutes on a good day. Tonight, with the first snowflakes beginning to fall, Derek pushed the old truck a little harder. Mrs. Carter lived in a yellow house with a garden that bloomed magnificently in summer, but now sat buried under a thin layer of white. She never charged him for watching Wesley, no matter how many times he tried to press money into her weathered hands. "That little girl lost her mama," she would say, pushing the bills back. "The least this old woman can do is give her daddy a few hours to earn a living." Derek had stopped arguing months ago. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. Wesley ran to him the moment he walked through the door, her small body crashing into his legs with the force of a tiny hurricane. She smelled like cookies and crayons, and when she looked up at him with Caroline's eyes, something in his chest tightened the way it always did. "Daddy, Mrs. Carter let me help make dinner," she announced, her voice carrying the gravity of someone reporting world-changing news. "I stirred the soup." Derek lifted her into his arms, feeling the familiar weight of her, the way she fit perfectly against his shoulder. "That sounds like a very important job," he said, and her smile could have powered the whole town. The snow fell harder on the drive home. Their rental house sat at the end of a street that the city seemed to have forgotten, the paint peeling, the porch sagging slightly to the left. But inside, Derek had done what he could. Wesley's drawings covered the refrigerator in a chaos of color. A wooden horse he'd carved from scrap lumber sat on the mantel, its proportions slightly wrong, but loved fiercely by its owner. They ate dinner at a table that wobbled, unless you put a folded napkin under one leg, macaroni and cheese from a box, because that was what the budget allowed. And Wesley chattered about her day with the endless energy of childhood. "Daddy," she said suddenly, her fork pausing midair, "why doesn't our house have a mommy like Lily's house?" The question hit Derek like a physical blow. He set down his own fork, taking a moment to find words that wouldn't shatter either of them. "Some houses have mommies, and some don't, sweetheart," he managed. "But our house has something special. It has you and me, and that's a pretty good team, don't you think?" Wesley considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher weighing the meaning of existence. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to her macaroni. But later, after she had fallen asleep clutching the wooden horse, Derek stood at the window and watched the snow pile higher, and the loneliness pressed against him like something physical, like hands pushing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. The blizzard came without warning. One moment the snow was falling gently, and the next, the wind screamed across Millbrook like a living thing. Derek had left his phone charger at the garage, a stupid mistake that now meant walking through a storm that weather reports were already calling historic. He bundled Wesley into bed, asked Mrs. Carter to look in on her, and stepped out into a world gone white. The walk to the garage took 3 times longer than usual, each step a battle against wind that seemed determined to push him back. By the time he reached it, his fingers were numb and his lungs burned from breathing frozen air. He found his charger exactly where he'd left it, sitting on the workbench next to Caroline's photograph, and he was about to leave when he saw the headlights. They flickered weakly through the blizzard. A car pulled off to the side of the road, its hazards blinking in a rhythm that seemed almost desperate. Derek told himself he should go home. Wesley was waiting. The storm was getting worse, but his feet carried him toward the car anyway, the way they always carried him toward things that needed fixing. The driver's window was fogged over from the inside, and when he knocked on it, the face that appeared made him take a step back. She couldn't have been more than 22. With dark hair plastered to her pale cheeks and eyes that held the particular emptiness of someone who had recently lost everything. Her lips were cracked, her fingers blue where they gripped the steering wheel, and when she tried to speak, her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Her name was Penny, and her story spilled out in fragments between shivers. The startup that had laid her off 2 days before Christmas, citing budget cuts that somehow never affected the executives. The boyfriend named Keith, who had cleaned out their shared bank account and disappeared, leaving nothing but a note that said he needed to find himself. The eviction notice that had arrived that morning, giving her 48 hours to vacate an apartment she could no longer afford. She had been driving to her grandmother's house 3 states away, the only family she had left when her car had simply stopped running. Her phone was dead, her credit cards were maxed out, and now she was trapped in a blizzard in a town she had never heard of, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a suitcase full of memories she couldn't afford to keep. Derek listened to all of it without interrupting, then popped the hood and spent 20 minutes with frozen fingers trying to coax the engine back to life. When it finally turned over, he felt a small surge of triumph, but it faded quickly when he looked at the road. The snow had already made it impassable. Even his truck, which had seen him through a dozen winters, wouldn't make it more than a few blocks in this. He stood there for a long moment, snow collecting on his shoulders, knowing what he was about to do and knowing how it would look. A widower bringing a young woman home. The neighbors would talk. They always did. But when Penny looked at him with those hollow eyes, he saw something that reminded him of himself on the night Caroline died. The same desperation. The same feeling of being utterly alone in a universe that didn't care. "My house isn't much," he said, "but it's warm, and my daughter makes pretty good company. You can have the couch until the storm passes." Penny opened her mouth to argue, to offer payment she didn't have, to insist she would be fine. Then the wind howled louder, rattling the garage windows, and she simply nodded. They drove through streets that had become rivers of white, Derek's hands tight on the wheel, Penny silent beside him. Mrs. Carter met them at the door with raised eyebrows and a sleeping Wesley in her arms. She said nothing about the stranger, just transferred the little girl into Derek's arms and disappeared into the storm with a knowing look that Derek chose not to interpret. Mrs. Miller from across the street was watching from her window, and Derek could already imagine the gossip spreading through Millbrook by morning. Wesley woke when Derek laid her in bed, her eyes finding Penny standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. "A friend who needs a place to stay for a little while," Derek said, smoothing her hair back. "Is that okay?" Wesley studied Penny with the unfiltered honesty of childhood. Then she smiled. "She looks cold," she said. "She can borrow my blanket." And with that verdict delivered, she closed her eyes and was asleep again within seconds. Derek showed Penny to the couch. brought her blankets and a pillow, and a mug of instant coffee that was all he had to offer. She took everything with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and when she looked up at him, there were tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll find a way to repay you." Derek shook his head. "Just get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." The next morning, Millbrook woke to find itself buried. The radio reported that the storm would last at least 3 more days, maybe 4. Schools were closed, roads were impassable. The world had shrunk to the size of a small house, with peeling paint and a table that wobbled. Wesley discovered Penny at breakfast, staring at her with the fascination usually reserved for exotic zoo animals. "Are you Daddy's friend?" she asked, climbing into her chair without taking her eyes off the stranger. "I'm going to be," Penny said, and something in her voice made it sound like a promise. Derek watched from the kitchen, scrambling eggs he couldn't really afford, and felt the first crack in the walls he had built around himself. Penny wanted to help. She insisted on it, actually, with a stubbornness that Derek would come to recognize as one of her defining traits. But she was useless in the kitchen. Her first attempt at making toast resulted in smoke alarms and laughter, Wesley giggling so hard she nearly fell off her chair, while Derek frantically waved a towel at the detector. Her attempt at washing dishes left the floor flooded. Her attempt at folding laundry produced shapes that defied geometry. But she kept trying, kept failing, kept getting up and trying again. And Derek found himself watching her with something that felt dangerously close to admiration. The second night, Penny discovered his secret. She had woken to use the bathroom and found him at the kitchen table, a broken phone spread out before him in pieces, a tiny screwdriver in his hands. The light from a single lamp cast shadows across his face, making him look older than his 32 years. "I fix them for extra money," he explained without looking up. "People bring me their cracked screens, their water damage, their mysterious failures. $20 here, 30 there, it adds up." Penny sat down across from him, watching his hands move with surprising delicacy for someone who spent his days wrestling with engines. "Where did you learn to do this?" Derek shrugged. "YouTube, mostly. Books from the library. Trial and error." He didn't mention the months of frustration, the phones he had destroyed before figuring out what he was doing. "I learn whatever needs learning. That's what being a dad means." On the third day, Wesley asked Penny to help her with a drawing. It was supposed to be a birthday present for Derek, whose birthday was the following week, and it was supposed to be a secret. Penny was pulled into the conspiracy with solemn oaths of silence and detailed instructions about what the drawing should contain. "Daddy, me, and our house," Wesley said, pointing to each element as she drew them with the unwavering confidence of childhood artistry. But then she paused, her crayon hovering over the paper. Without saying anything, she added a fourth figure standing next to Derek. The figure had dark hair like Penny's. Wesley didn't explain. She didn't need to. That afternoon, a customer came to pick up a phone Derek had been working on. His name was Harrison, and he owned half the commercial property in Millbrook, and he looked at Derek the way people look at something stuck to the bottom of their shoe. "How much?" he asked, not bothering with pleasantries. $60, Derek said. "Labor and parts." Harrison pulled out his wallet, extracted 3 20s, and dropped them on the floor at Derek's feet. The bills scattered in the draft from the open door. "There's your money," Harrison said, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Count it if you want." Derek felt his jaw tighten, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Through the window, he could see Wesley and Penny building a snowman in the yard, the little girl's laughter carrying even through the glass. He bent down and picked up the bills, one by one, not rushing, not apologizing. When he stood, he met Harrison's eyes and said nothing. The silence stretched until Harrison cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable, and left without another word. Derek watched him go, then turned to find Penny standing in the doorway. She had seen everything. "Why?" she asked, her voice tight with anger on his behalf. "Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you stand up to him?" Derek looked at the money in his hands, then at his daughter, still visible through the window. "Because she's watching," he said. "Because I want her to know that our dignity isn't something that can be bought or sold or thrown on the ground. If I had yelled, if I had made a scene, she would have learned that anger is the answer." Instead, she saw her father stand tall, even when someone tried to make him feel small. That's worth more than any satisfaction I might have gotten from telling that man what I really think of him. Penny stayed quiet for a long time after that. But that night, when Wesley had gone to bed and the house was silent except for the wind howling outside, she sat down next to Derek by the fireplace and told him about her dreams. The app she wanted to build, something that would connect workers like him with people who needed their skills. A platform that treated blue-collar labor with respect, that ensured fair payment, that built communities of craftsmen who could rely on each other. "I'm going to build it," she said, and her hollow eyes weren't hollow anymore. They burned with something that looked like purpose. "I'm going to make something that matters." Derek nodded, watching the fire dance. "Then do it," he said simply. "You're young, you're smart, you have time to fail and try again. Don't let what happened in the past become your future. The people who hurt you, they don't get to define who you become." The fourth night, they sat together after Wesley fell asleep, not talking, just existing in the same space. The storm still raged outside, but inside, something had shifted. Penny looked around at the worn furniture, the crayon drawings on the refrigerator, the wooden toys Derek had carved with his own hands, and she understood something she had never understood before. "You're the richest person I know," she said suddenly. Derek laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. "I can barely make rent." Penny shook her head. "I spent 3 years with a man who had everything and gave nothing. You have nothing and give everything. That's wealth, Derek. That's the only kind that matters." She reached out and took his hand, and neither of them pulled away. On the morning of the 5th day, the storm broke. Sunlight flooded through windows that had shown nothing but white for days, and the snow sparkled like scattered diamonds. The roads were being cleared. The world was opening up again, and Penny's car was finally able to start. She packed her single suitcase slowly, dreading every item she folded. Wesley had attached herself to Penny's leg and was refusing to let go, her small face streaked with tears that she didn't bother to hide. "Don't go," she begged. "Please don't go. Stay here. Stay with us." Derek watched from the doorway, not trusting himself to speak. He had known this moment was coming. He had prepared for it. But preparations meant nothing against the reality of loss. Penny knelt down until she was at Wesley's eye level. "I have to go, sweetheart," she said, her own voice thick with emotions she hadn't expected. "But I want you to know something. I want you to know that these 4 days with you and your daddy have been the best 4 days I can remember. You showed me what a real family looks like. You showed me what love looks like." Wesley sniffled. "Then why are you leaving?" It was the question Derek wanted to ask too, the question he was too proud to voice. Penny took a deep breath. "Because I need to become someone who deserves to come back." She found Wesley hiding in her room, not the living room as Derek had thought. The little girl was curled up under her blanket, clutching the wooden horse her father had made. Penny sat down on the edge of the bed and waited. After a long moment, Wesley's voice came from beneath the blanket, small and broken. "Mommy said she was going to buy milk," she said. "She said she'd be right back, but she never came back. She lied." Derek, standing in the doorway, felt his heart crack open. He had never told Wesley the truth about Caroline. He had said Mommy went to heaven, that she was watching from the stars, but he had never explained that Caroline hadn't chosen to leave, that the accident wasn't her fault. that she would have given anything to come back to her little girl. Penny looked at Derek, asking permission with her eyes. He nodded, unable to speak. She pulled back the blanket gently and gathered Wesley into her arms. "Your mommy didn't lie to you," Penny said softly. "Your mommy had an accident." "Do you know what that means?" Wesley shook her head. "It means something happened that she didn't want to happen. It means she tried to come home to you, tried with everything she had, but her body couldn't make it. She didn't leave you, baby. She would never leave you. She's still with you, in your heart, watching over you every single day." Wesley looked up, her eyes searching Penny's face for any sign of deception. "Promise," she whispered. "I promise," Penny said. "And I promise you something else too. I'm not going to disappear. I'm going to come back. I don't know when. I don't know how. But I'm going to come back." Derek walked her to her car, his hands shoved deep in his pockets against the cold. Wesley stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching them with eyes that had aged years in the last few minutes. "Thank you," Derek said, "for what you told her. I should have said it years ago. I just couldn't find the words." Penny looked back at the little girl on the porch. "She's going to be okay," she said. "She has you. That's more than enough." She turned to face Derek, and for a moment, neither of them knew what to say. The words that mattered most were the hardest to speak. "I'll marry you when I'm rich," Penny said finally, a smile breaking through her tears. "Wait for me." Derek laughed despite himself. "That's not how proposals usually work." Penny was already climbing into her car. "Nothing about this is how things usually work," she called back. "That's what makes it matter." She started the engine, the same engine that Derek had coaxed back to life 5 days ago. Through the windshield, she saw Wesley break away from the porch and run toward the car. Derek caught her, lifted her up so she could see through the window. Wesley pressed her small hand against the glass, and Penny pressed hers on the other side. She drove away from Millbrook with that image burned into her memory. A man and his daughter, standing in the snow, growing smaller in her rearview mirror until they disappeared entirely. She pulled over twice to cry. She almost turned back 3 times. But she kept driving because she had made a promise, and promises meant something. They had to. 6 years passed, like 6 lifetimes. Derek's hair gained threads of silver at the temples. Wesley grew from a small child into a young girl with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet strength. The garage stayed small, but it stayed open. The house still needed repairs that Derek couldn't afford, but it was still home. Some things had changed, of course. Wesley had grown old enough to understand the truth about her mother, had visited Caroline's grave for the first time, had cried and raged, and eventually made peace with the loss she was finally old enough to comprehend. Derek had never remarried, had never even dated, though Mrs. Carter had tried to set him up more times than he could count. And on certain nights, when the snow fell heavy outside his window, he would take out a photograph that Wesley had drawn 6 years ago and trace the 4th figure with his finger. The woman with dark hair who had stayed for 4 days and changed everything. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in autumn, when the leaves were turning gold and the air carried the first hint of winter. The doctor spoke in careful medical terms, but the message was clear enough. His heart was failing. Surgery was possible, but the cost was $80,000, more money than Derek had ever seen in his life, more than he could earn in years of fixing phones and cars and everything else that broke. He walked out of the hospital into autumn air that felt colder than it should have, and he made a decision. He would sell the garage. He would sell everything. He would give Wesley every chance at a future, even if it meant sacrificing his own. He told no one. He wrote the listing himself, took the photographs himself, posted it online himself, and he waited for someone to buy the only thing he had left. Wesley found out anyway. She had been looking for her birth certificate for a school project and found the papers in his desk drawer instead, the medical records and the real estate listing and the letters from the hospital about payment plans he couldn't afford. She came to him with tears streaming down her face and questions he didn't know how to answer. "You were going to die," she said, her voice breaking on every word. "You were going to die and not tell me." Derek pulled her into his arms the way he had when she was small. But she wasn't small anymore. She was 11 years old, and she had already lost one parent, and the thought of losing another was more than she could bear. "I was trying to protect you," Derek said. "I've always been trying to protect you." Wesley pulled back, her eyes fierce through the tears. "I don't want protection," she said. "I want you. I want my dad." 3,000 miles away, in an office that overlooked a city skyline, Penny stared at her computer screen. The listing had appeared in her Google alert, the one she had set up years ago to track any news from Millbrook. For sale. Caldwell Auto Repair. Owner retiring. But Derek wasn't old enough to retire. Derek would never sell that garage willingly. Something was wrong. She picked up her phone, then put it down, picked it up again. She had built her company from nothing, had turned her dream into a platform that served over 50,000 workers across the country, had made more money than she ever thought possible. And yet she had never gone back. Fear, maybe. Or shame that it had taken so long. Or the worry that she had imagined the connection, that 4 days in a snowstorm meant nothing to him. The garage was exactly as she remembered it. Smaller, maybe, or perhaps she had just grown. Derek was inside, shaking hands with a man in a suit who was clearly a buyer, nodding along to terms that were probably unfair. Penny's heels clicked against the concrete floor as she walked in, and both men turned to look at her. The buyer saw a successful woman, someone who didn't belong in a place like this. Derek saw a ghost. "This garage isn't for sale," Penny said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. The buyer sputtered, confused. Derek stood frozen in the center of his garage, surrounded by tools and memories, and the ghost of a conversation that had seemed like a joke when it happened. "Penny," he whispered. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, in the shower, in business meetings, in the quiet moments before sleep. She had planned what she would say, how she would explain why she had stayed away so long. But now, standing in front of him, all those carefully crafted words disappeared. "You're selling the garage," she said. It wasn't a question. You never would have sold the garage unless something was wrong. Derek's jaw tightened. "How did you even find out? How did you even—" He stopped, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter. This isn't your problem. I don't need charity." The word hit her like a slap. "Charity," she repeated. "You think that's why I'm here?" Wesley appeared in the doorway, curious about the stranger who had interrupted her father's meeting. She was taller now, her dark hair longer, her face beginning to show the woman she would become. But when she saw Penny, something shifted in her expression. Recognition. Memory. The echo of a promise made on a snowy morning when she was very small. "Miss Penny?" she whispered. Penny's composure cracked completely. She crossed the garage in 3 steps and pulled Wesley into her arms, and neither of them spoke because words were not enough for moments like this. "You came back," Wesley said into Penny's shoulder. "You said you would, and you did." Penny held her tighter. "I'm sorry it took so long. I'm so sorry." The truth came out over coffee at the kitchen table, the same table that still wobbled unless you put a napkin under one leg. Derek's illness, the surgery he couldn't afford, the decision to sell everything so that Wesley would be provided for. Penny listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a mug that had probably been old 6 years ago. When Derek finished, she set down the coffee and looked at him with eyes that had seen boardrooms and investors and battles he couldn't imagine. "I didn't come here to give you charity," she said. "I came here to offer you a partnership." She explained her idea. A training center, built on the foundation of his garage. A place where single parents could learn skills that would change their lives. Car repair, electronics, plumbing, carpentry. All the trades that were in demand, but never taught to people who needed them most. "I've been building my company for 6 years," she said, "and the whole time I've been thinking about this, about what you taught me in 4 days, about dignity, about work, about what it means to give someone a second chance." She leaned forward. "I need you, Derek. Not your garage. You. Your knowledge, your way of teaching. I can fund it. I can build the infrastructure. But without someone like you at the center of it, it's just another program. With you, it could change lives." Derek shook his head. "I can't accept that. I don't take handouts." Penny slammed her palm on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. "This isn't a handout," she said, her voice rising. "This is a business proposal. I'm offering you a job. I'm offering you equity in something that could matter. I'm offering you a chance to do for others what you did for me. If you want to call that charity, then fine. But don't you dare pretend that your pride is worth more than your daughter's father." Wesley had been listening from the hallway. Now she walked into the kitchen, her 11-year-old face set with a determination that reminded Derek painfully of Caroline. "Dad," she said, "Miss Penny isn't trying to buy you. She's trying to be your partner. There's a difference." She crossed her arms. "You taught me that dignity matters. But being too proud to accept help isn't dignity. It's stubbornness. It's giving up. And you told me we don't give up." Derek stared at his daughter, this girl who had somehow become wise when he wasn't looking. "When did you get so smart?" he asked. Wesley shrugged. "I learned from watching you," she said. "Now stop being an idiot and say yes." The surgery happened in December, paid for by a health initiative that Penny's company had started for workers who couldn't afford care. Derek survived. More than survived, actually. He woke up stronger than he had felt in years, with Wesley holding one hand and Penny holding the other. The training center opened the following spring, in the space that had been Derek's garage, with the name Second Chance painted on the sign that Wesley had designed herself. The first class was small, just 5 single parents learning to repair phones and computers and electronics, skills that would give them options they hadn't had before. But it grew, week by week, month by month, until the waiting list was longer than Derek ever could have imagined. A year later, on the anniversary of the center's opening, they held a celebration. Over 100 graduates had found new jobs, started new careers, built new lives. Derek stood at the front of the room, looking out at faces that reflected his own journey. And he understood finally what Penny had been trying to tell him all along. Wealth wasn't about money. It was about impact. It was about the ripples you sent out into the world, the lives you touched, the chances you gave to people who had none. Penny stood beside him, and when he reached for her hand, she was already reaching for his. Wesley, 12 years old, and convinced she was the most important person in the operation, made her way to the front of the room. "I have a question," she announced to the assembled crowd. "Miss Penny told my dad 6 years ago that she would marry him when she got rich. Well, her company is worth like $1 billion now." "10 million, Penny corrected, laughing. "So she's definitely rich, so I want to know, are you going to marry my dad or not?" The room went silent. Penny looked at Derek. Derek looked at Penny. 6 years of waiting, 4 days that changed everything. And a question that had hung in the air since a snowy morning when a young woman had said words she wasn't sure she meant, and a man had laughed because he wasn't sure he deserved them. "Well," Penny said slowly, "I did make a promise." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Are you proposing to me in front of 100 people and my daughter?" Penny grinned. "That depends. Are you going to say yes?" He kissed her instead of answering, which made Wesley shriek with delight and the crowd burst into applause. When they finally pulled apart, Derek's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "You were already rich," he said. "From the first moment you stayed, from the first moment you saw us as people worth knowing. You were richer than anyone I've ever met." Penny leaned her forehead against his. "Then I guess we're both wealthy," she said. "In all the ways that matter." Outside the window, snow had begun to fall. Not a blizzard, just a gentle dusting that turned the world soft and quiet. Wesley pressed her face against the glass, watching the flakes spiral down. "It's snowing," she announced. "Just like when Miss Penny came the first time." She turned back, her face bright with joy. "Does this mean I get a mom now?" Penny walked over and wrapped her arms around the girl who had drawn her into a family portrait before they were a family. "You've always had a mom," she said. "Caroline never left you. But now you have someone else too. Someone who will be here. Someone who isn't going anywhere." Wesley hugged her back so hard that Penny could barely breathe. "Good," she said, "because I've been waiting 6 years." They built the snowman that evening, all 3 of them together. Wesley insisted on giving it 3 heads, 1 for each member of their strange and wonderful family. Derek contributed buttons for eyes and a crooked smile made from pebbles. Penny wrapped her scarf around its necks, not caring that it was expensive, not caring about anything except this moment and these people and this life she had somehow found. When they stepped back to admire their creation, they stood in a row, just like in Wesley's drawing, the one that had started it all. "You know," Penny said quietly, her breath visible in the cold air, "I never really believed I would make it back. I wanted to. I meant the promise, but I didn't believe it was possible." Derek took her hand, his fingers warm despite the cold. "What changed?" Penny looked at Wesley, who was already starting on a second snowman. "She believed when I couldn't. And eventually, her faith became mine." The snow kept falling as they walked back inside, leaving footprints that would be covered by morning. But the snowman would remain, standing guard outside the house that had once been a place of loneliness and was now something else entirely. Not perfect, not easy, but home. A place where a man who had lost everything had learned to hope again, where a woman who had been broken had learned to build, where a little girl who had lost her mother had gained something she thought she'd never have. And in the years that followed, whenever people asked Penny how she had built her success, she would tell them about a night in a blizzard, about a man who had every reason to walk away but didn't, about a little girl who drew strangers into her family, about the moment she realized that wealth wasn't something you accumulated, but something you gave away. And she would smile, because she knew something that most people never learned. The richest moments in life cost nothing at all. They just require someone brave enough to stay.